Sleep deprivation among American teenagers is an epidemic. Only about 1 in 10 gets the 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night recommended by sleep scientists and pediatricians. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, phew, we're doing good, my kid's getting 8 hours. Remember, 8 hours is the minimum recommendation. You're barely passing. 8 hours is kind of like getting a C on your report card. There are many factors contributing to this epidemic, but a major factor preventing teens from getting the sleep they need is actually a matter of public policy, not hormones, social lives, or Snapchat. Across the country, many schools are starting around 7:30 a.m. or earlier, despite the fact that major medical organizations recommend that middle and high schools start no earlier than 8:30 a.m. These early start policies have a direct effect on how much, or really how little, sleep American teenagers are getting. They're also pitting teenagers and their parents in a fundamentally unwinnable fight against their own bodies. Around the time of puberty, teenagers experience a delay in their biological clock, which determines when we feel most awake and when we
so I am gonna talk a little bit briefly about different systems of memory, and in fact much of the memory that influences and guides our everyday life actually kind of hides in the background. You actually don't know that when you are using the bulk of your memory. And this is called implicit or procedural memory. This includes things like cultural and social norms, so kind of understanding how you are supposed to behave in a classroom or expecting a certain thing to happen when you walk into a restaurant. These are all things that we have learnt and acquired over our years, but it's not necessarily something that we think about. Language, also, in many aspects, is something that is fairly automatic and we've acquired and used very naturally, and other learned skills such as reading or driving. These are things that might have been effortful at one time, but now they just come very easily and automatically to us. And in fact, if you actually try to describe to somebody how you drive, it actually kind of messes you up. So these are in a lot of cases, consciousness kind of gets in the way of a lot of these aspects of implicit memory. Now when we're talking about our memory, so for instance, people tell me a lot that their memories are bad. When people are saying, when they talk about their memory, they're usually talking about explicit or episodic memory, and these are very different from implicit memories. These are memories that have a very specific tag or space and time. These are highly personal memories usually, so this could be everything from remembering what you ate for breakfast to what you did on your last vacation, or remembering a significant birthday that you had several years ago or in the past, or just an answer to a multiple-choice question on a
There's a huge amount of research showing, that we're eating very large amounts of sugar. It's an underestimate, because when you ask people how much they eat, when they know it's bad for them, they tell you much less, just like with alcohol. So the actual estimates of sugar are much lower than they should be, but we're all eating far too much sugar. We don't need sugar. It's stuffed into products like sweet and soft drinks. One bottle of Coca-Cola's got 10 teaspoons of sugar in, and then biscuits and all the confectionery, cakes, and everywhere you move there's sugar, and it's incredibly cheap for the industry to put in. It's one of the cheapest ingredients you can put into.
Just about old enough to remember when God Save the Queen was played at the end of films in the cinema. At such moments we were expected to stand to attention before filing out of the auditorium and onto the streets. Mercifully, this practice became obsolete before I was out of short trousers. In recent years, I've seldom had to endure the drone of the national anthem. As a nation, we hear it before the kick-off of England football matches. We also hear it on the rare occasions, at least prior to 2012, that a British athlete won a gold medal at an athletics championships or at the Olympics. We might hear a snatch of it on the news whenever the monarch turns up on an official visit. But the fact is, God Save the Queen probably reached the height of its popularity during the heyday of the British Empire, when nearly all the colonial territories utilized it as their national theme tune. However, with the onset of 20th century decolonization, God Save the Queen was quickly replaced by new national anthems in Africa, in Asia, in the Caribbean, Australasia and Canada. These days, its ponderous beat is no longer globally ubiquitous.
Candace Galen. Candace Galen is based at the University of Missouri in Columbia, and being a biologist, she thought, why not use this astronomical phenomenon to study a biological one? Specifically, as the skies darkened would daytime pollinators, like bumblebees and honeybees, call it quits? What better activity during an eclipse than to go out with a recorder and record the bees? So, Galen asked 400 citizen scientists, including young students, to place audio recorders in 16 flower patches along the path of totality in Oregon, Idaho, and Missouri. When they analyzed the audio, they found that during partial eclipse, bee buzzing continued. But when totality hit, the bees went silent, and only the conversational buzz of human observers could be heard. Then, as the moon passed and the sun again lit up the sky, the bees regained their buzz. If you're a senior citizen, music in the background may be distracting, but for younger people, experts at multitasking, it's apparently no big deal. That's according to a study in the journal Gerontologist. Researchers recruited 103 people, half between the ages of 18 and 30, the others between 60 and 75. The volunteers then took part in memorization exercises and a drill where they had to quickly match a photo of a face with the same face in an array of unfamiliar faces. Participants did the exercises in silence. Others performed the tasks while listening to white noise or instrumental jazz, blues, classical, and electronic music. Across age groups, the consensus was that the background sound was distracting, but only older people's performance suffered when the noise was present. For example, older folks who did the face matching with music playing remembered 10% fewer faces. The result matches up with the theory that the elderly are less able to filter out what's called distracting, task-irrelevant information. In this case, the distracting info might have interfered with them storing the facial image in the first place, much less impeding their ability to remember it a short while later.
Daniel Harris, a scholar of consumption and style, has observed that until photography finally supplanted illustration as the primary means of advertising clothing in the 1950s, glamour adhered less in the face of the drawing, which was by necessity schematic and generalized, than in the sketch's attitude, posture, and gestures, especially in the strangely dainty positions of the hands. Glamour once resided so emphatically in the stance of the model that the faces in the illustrations cannot really be said to have expressions at all, but angles or tilts. Illustrations cannot really be said to have expressions at all, but angles or tilts. The chin raised upwards in a haughty look, the eyes lowered in an attitude of introspection, the head cocked at an inquisitive or coquettish angle, or the profile presented in sharp outline, emanating power, the severity, like an emperor's bust embossed on a Roman coin.
With more than 600 mobile and web applications releasing every year, finding consistency and making the right application is a difficult task. Among all the noise of ever updating and ever arriving applications and software, the need to stand out and come out with a unique product or a service is a dire need. In order to resolve this issue, the Google came up with a design-oriented framework and methodology to solve problems and ideate. This framework is known as the design spirit. As the word sprint says, the design sprint is a time-constrained, quick, and rapid process that is done in 5 steps spanning across 5 days. In each day, one part of the problem and solution are dealt with. By doing a rapid time-constrained practice like this enables the team in taking quick yet efficient decisions in a disciplined Before World War II, Indochina was a union of Asian nations under French colonial control. These countries, which belong to Indochina, correspond to present-day Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and peninsular Malaysia. The decolonization and independence process began in 1940, which coincided by the occupation by Japanese forces. However, when Japan was defeated in 1945, the countries which belonged to Indochina seek to take advantage of the situation to leave the Union and proclaimed their independence. In the case of Vietnam, in September of 1945, with the help of France, Bao Day, who had been emperor since 1926, was overthrown, and the independence of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam was proclaimed. It is the brightness of the mirror surface that makes it reflect light. When light falls on a surface, some of the light may be reflected or thrown back, some absorbed, and some allowed to pass through. In a mirror, the surface is made so bright that as much light as possible is reflected and as little as possible is absorbed. The earliest mirrors consisted of thin discs of metal, generally bronze, slightly convex and polished on one side. The method of making mirrors by backing glass with thin sheets of metal was already known in the Middle Ages, and there was even a guild of glass mirror makers in Germany in 1373. The commercial manufacture of mirrors was developed in 16th century Venice. Coated mirrors were made from blown cylinders of glass, which were slit, flattened on a stone, polished, and their backs silvered by an amalgam of tin and mercury. These mirrors had a high reflecting power, but a considerable improvement came in France in 1691 when the art of making plate glass was introduced. The chemical process of coating a glass surface with metallic silver was discovered by a German man in 1830.
If you are unsure of drawing directly in pen and ink, start off with a light pencil sketch. This will allow you to make sure that your proportions are correct and that you are happy with the composition. Take a few minutes to study your subject, this chair and violin. Notice how the straight lines of the chair differ from the curves of the violin. Once you are ready to begin drawing, define the shape of the chair with clean straight lines. Then add contrast by drawing the outline of the violin with gently curved lines. You may have to apply more pressure to the nib when drawing curved lines to allow the ink to flow easily. When you have drawn the outlines of both objects, add in the finer details, such as the seat of the chair and the violin strings. Suggest the texture of the woven seat by using light and dark strokes of the pen.
Land animals move easily through air because air does not slow them down. Sea creatures, on the other hand, have to move through water, which is hundreds of times thicker than air. A sea animal has to push itself through water in order to move. Sea animals use many different ways to swim, creep or glide through water. Fish are able to swim by bending their bodies into waves. They have flattened fins and tails that push against the water like oar blades, converting their body waves into forward movement. The size of a fish's tail contributes to its swimming speed. Small tail fins are found in slow swimmers like the eel. The medium-sized tail of the bass is linked with a medium to fast swimming speed. Long pointed tail lobes like those on the marlin are found only on fast swimmers. Sea mammals like whales and dolphins swim in a very fish-like way, except for one important difference. Because their ancestors lived on the land, they developed tails that moved up and down. Whales and dolphins wave their tails up and down rather than side to side like fish do. The seahorse is a fish whose tail is not used for swimming at all. The seahorse uses its thin, coiled tail to attach itself to seaweed, like a monkey's tail holds onto a tree branch. Squids and octopuses move in a completely different way. They use a type of jet propulsion, shooting water out through a nozzle to force themselves along. And then there are the creatures that live on the bottom of the sea. Sea slugs, limpets, and whelks creep on a single flat piece of muscle called a foot. Ripples pass along the foot, which allows these animals to glide smoothly forward. Psychology is a relatively new science. Like other sciences, psychology must be able to state laws. A law is a way of organizing knowledge about something so that we can make predictions. When enough knowledge is gained about a subject, a scientist can state precisely what will happen under certain conditions. We experimental psychologists are interested in developing laws about human behavior, so we'll be able to understand and predict what people do and why they do it. Of course, to develop laws about human behavior, we must assume there's some regularity to it. We can't be psychologists without making the assumption that behavior follows.
The body of the worker bee is divided into three segments: head, thorax, and abdomen. On the head are the mandibles, the jaw-like organs which enable the bees to perform the necessary hive duties and to mold the wax and build their combs. The honeybee's 4 wings and 6 legs are fastened to the thorax. Located in the abdomen are the honey sac and the sting, with its highly developed poison sac. The sting is used by the workers for self-defense and for the protection of their colony. The worker uses her sting only once, for in doing so,
As kids, many of us pondered what stars are made of. Some grown-up astronomers, on the other hand, wonder about where stars came from. Now, a study serves up a surprise, because it seems that the smallest galaxies in the universe gave rise to an unexpectedly large proportion of stars. The findings are in the Astrophysical Journal. Most of the stars we see in the sky were formed when the universe was young, just a few billion years after the Big Bang. So, to study stellar origins, scientists use telescopes that allow them to see galaxies that are so far away they're essentially looking back in time. Previous observations had focused on the star-forming powers of larger galaxies, but in this latest study, researchers used data collected by a powerful camera aboard the Hubble Space Telescope. With this instrument, they could eyeball smaller, dwarf galaxies, and they found that these diminutive dynamos churned out stars at a furious rate, fast enough to double their mass in only 150 million years. That reproductive feat would take most so-called normal galaxies 1 to 3 billion years. Seems the universe has long known what Danny DeVito, Michael J. Fox, and Dustin Hoffman later proved. You don't have to be big to have real star power. What does a bookworm have in common with a black-tufted marmoset? They both like a little quiet. Or so say scientists in the Royal Society journal Biology Letters. As urban areas continue to expand, their human inhabitants spread all sorts of pollution. Air pollution, light pollution, even noise pollution. Each of these environmental encroachments affects the survival and behavior of local wildlife. Monkeys are no exception. Scientists in Brazil were studying how marmosets in a city park cope with ambient noise. Then they found that the monkeys tend to settle down in whatever part of the park is most quiet. On weekdays, the marmosets steered clear of the roar of traffic, and on Sundays they shunned the clamor of visiting crowds. They dodged all the din, even when moving meant that they had to leave behind the places that offered them the most food. Could be that the monkeys are just skittish when it comes to unwelcome sounds. Or maybe they can't hear what their friends are saying when it gets too loud. Either way, next time you see a cute little marmoset, forget ooh or aw or ee. Try shh.
Advanced technology will create growth in the economy. Air pollution is a serious problem all over the world. Archaeologists discovered tools and fossils in ancient times. Before attending the lecture, you must register online or by post. Calculations may not be needed in this examination. Essays and assignments are spread across the academic year.